Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our presentation. We'll be talking about how we are using Wikimedia across the Smithsonian, especially to close representation gaps on Wiki about women's history. My name is Kelly Doyle. I'm the Open Knowledge Coordinator for the American Women's History Initiative.
And I'm Andrew Lee. I'm the Wikimedian at large at the Smithsonian. So let me give you a very brief look at the two different strategic goals and plans from the Smithsonian and the Wikimedia movement, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But if you look, the visions and the types of activities both organizations are looking at are very much aligned here. You can see that the Smithsonian vision is to build on its unique strengths to engage and inspire more people, and the Wikimedia goal is to become the essential infrastructure of the ecosystem of free knowledge and to be highly inclusive. And anyone who shares in our vision will be able to join us. And you can see that the engagement of the Smithsonian is part of this, joining the efforts of the Wikimedia movement's open access and open content mission. So we can see that both of these organizations have a lot to look forward to. One of the goals as well is to reach 1 billion people with a digital first strategy. And with Wikipedia and Wikimedia being the #1 reference site in the world, this is certainly a key way to reach those 1 billion folks. So Kelly, why don't we go to the next slide? And we'll explain very quickly this new term you probably haven't seen that much, which is Wikimedia engagement. So most of you would know about Wikipedia as the reference site you probably use multiple times a day, whether it is through a voice assistant or doing a Google search, or whether it shows up on your iPhone. But there are several other projects that are also part of this Wikimedia ecosystem. One is Wikimedia Commons, which is the repository of images and multimedia. So any picture or video you might see in Wikipedia actually comes from this Wikimedia Commons project. And Wikidata is a fairly new structured database that is being used to record and to have information in multiple languages so that they're ready to be used in not only the Wikipedia projects, but all over the world with different libraries, archives, and museums. Next slide, Kelly. So this is just a rough view of how we see the different types of engagement at different layers of what we might call the information pyramid. So at the very basic level, as many of you know, 2 years ago, the open access policy was announced by the Smithsonian, and just getting that data released so that it can be ingested into Wikipedia was a huge plus here. On top of that, we'll be talking about some of the things we're doing to create work lists, to find gaps in the knowledge, to improve content in the Wikimedia ecosystem through the expertise of the Smithsonian and other folks in the Wikimedia community. And at the very highest layer of this stack is how to build tools to provide more insights and to explore the data information in ways that we've never seen before. And we'll show you some examples of that today. Next slide, Kelly. So as you saw, Lonnie Bunch was part of the announcement of the open access policy there. Kelly joined as the first person dedicated to Wikipedia content and Wikimedia content as the AWHI Open Knowledge Coordinator. And I joined in 2020 as the Wikimedian at large, working across the different units on open access and Wiki initiatives. Next slide. Go ahead.
So I wanted to touch on the gender gap on Wiki, which is a lot of what we're focusing on in the American Women's History Initiative, and how we can get collections about women from across the Smithsonian more knowable online. And so one of the problems that we see on the Wikimedia side of things is a participatory gap, where only roughly 1 out of 10 Wikipedia editors identifies as female, which also then feeds into a content-based gender gap, where only 19.16% of biographies on Wikipedia are about women. And And then that means that less than 400,000 of Wikipedia's 1.8 million biographies are about women. And we know that those are varying levels of length and completeness. And we have a lot of work to get American women's stories knowable on Wikipedia, but also having women who edit Wikipedia to tell those stories. Andrew, I think you're muted.
Sorry. So I thought we'd show you one example of how Wikipedia and the Smithsonian working together can have a major impact. And this was done at a public program that we had called an edit-a-thon in 2019. And we timed this because we had seen that when we started adding things to Wikipedia, they would show up on Google and the search engines very quickly. And because we know that all the different search engines in the world are all monitoring Wikipedia to get the latest information. So what we did was we created an article about Vera Simons with Air and Space Museum at our public event. And she's a very well-known inventor and balloonist within the community, but she did not have a Wikipedia article about her. So we uploaded the picture, which was open access, into Wikimedia Commons, and we created a new Wikipedia article, and we timed it. After creating the article, 15 minutes later, it was number 3 in Google search rank. So it went from nothing to number 3 in 15 minutes. And some other tests we found, sometimes this can be as quick as 5 to 7 minutes. And this really shows you kind of the force multiplier in many ways that Wikipedia is serving out there. So Smithsonian has such great assets, but once you combine it with the speed and the high profile of Wikipedia, it's kind of the best of both worlds there. What's even more astonishing is that you don't even need to go to Google to find this. You don't even need to actively search on a website. If you go to your iPhone, many of you know that Siri knowledge is now kind of integrated into the operating system. So when you search for something on your phone, it'll search your contacts. It's actually searching the net with Siri knowledge, and it's actually getting all this information to you on your phone. So actually later that day, if you went to your iPhone or iOS device and you searched for Vera Simons, what you see on the screen there is what showed up. You saw the Smithsonian picture. You saw a very brief synopsis of her from Wikidata and the first line of the Wikipedia article. And it just shows you how integrated the Wikimedia ecosystem is into the global system of knowledge. And we've had multiple tests beyond this event that showed how quick these entries get into Google. And this is really exciting to see this. So the type of event that we had is one of many types of public programs that we offer out there. So this has been really an amazing way to turn something that was a setback with COVID into high engagement online. So this has been a great way to involve multiple Smithsonian units to do this kind of online virtual programming and find a new body of digital volunteers willing to help with the content here. And this has helped increase the visibility of Smithsonian assets and collections. And the next slide will show you an example where not only did we have an edit-a-thon to improve the article text, we actually were missing images of these very prominent women. And we actually had one of our artists at the Smithsonian draw these portrait photos or portrait paintings, and we uploaded these to Wikipedia and Wikimedia Commons, and they are now, available on Google and anywhere you're looking up the information on these two women. And this is just a great example of how, with the expertise Smithsonian has, we can actually go above and beyond the average contributor in Wikipedia. And some unexpected and surprising effects of this is that the activities that we have in doing edit-a-thons has actually led to interesting contacts with folks out there who are either relatives of these women or folks who want to actually donate content to the Smithsonian based on this type of activity that we have. So this is really amazing to see. Not only are we improving the knowledge out there, but it's actually having follow-on effects to have people contact the Smithsonian with either donations of artifacts or other resources. Next slide, Kelly. And we actually have some very firm metrics around the content that we're uploading. The bulk of the content so far has been from Smithsonian libraries and archives, and they account for like more than 4 million views across all the different Wikipedia language editions per month, which is pretty amazing. And we've started to talk more about our work at different conferences, and the Smithsonian working groups that are related to the Wikimedia work that we're doing include the GeoID working group, which is to find a unique identifier for every asset that Smithsonian has, and also the Data Carpentries monthly meeting, which actually we gave a talk to recently about how folks who are interested in Python programming and data science can get involved with the Wikimedia work that we're doing. Next slide, Kelly. And some of the things that we're doing that get into more of the technical backend is to do a comprehensive upload of the image and metadata that we have from the Smithsonian. Through the new open access API, we can do a lot of this in an automated manner, but some of this will take some work to match the data model the Smithsonian has to what we have in Wikidata. Some of the early partners we're working with are SAM, NAMAC, American History, Air and Space Museum, and Natural History, but we welcome any and all folks at the Smithsonian to work with us on this.
And besides the public-facing editathons that we do with various units across the Smithsonian, we also do internal trainings like brown bag sessions, and then internal micro events, like if you want to learn how to auto-populate an info box onto a Wikipedia article from Wikidata. We do those mini trainings with internal staff as well. So if there's ever a specific task you want to learn, we can always host around that. We also train Smithsonian interns around basic Wiki 101 information about the 3 main Wikimedia platforms, and then crowdsourcing events for images or making those small micro contributions to Wiki, which have a lower barrier to entry than, say, an editathon where you're learning lots of tasks at once. And so I did want to share some of the stats where we are with the events that we've been hosting since 2019, as well as some of the images that we've contributed from our collections. So far, we've added over 430,000 words about women explicitly from Smithsonian collections to Wikipedia, and we've added over 4,000 new references, largely from Smithsonian Magazine, Smithsonian blogs, or Smithsonian finding aids, which is great because then we get more traffic to Smithsonian content elsewhere on the web. We have added a small test batch of images, maybe 700 images to Wikimedia Commons, and those are receiving 19 million views on Wikipedia in multiple languages. And we have some really exciting use cases where NPG donated or added images of Josephine Baker that we weren't able to put in her English Wikipedia article, and they just sat on Wikimedia Commons waiting for an editor to come along. She is in the news a lot in the French-speaking world because she's being added to the French pantheon, I believe. And her images are now in French Wikipedia, and we're generating millions of views monthly just from French Wikipedia. And there's many, many use cases like this of our content being used off of just English-speaking Wikipedia, which is great. And we can track that through metrics tools to see where the images we've contributed are being used. So far, we've hosted 23 editathons. Again, we pivoted from in-person editathons in 2019 and 2020 to all virtual events. And again, testing with some micro crowdsourcing type of events. And then we've also done collaborations through the internship office of the Smithsonian, especially through the AWHI with Smithsonian affiliates that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, as well as partners within the Open GLAM world. This is just an example of some of the images that we have added to Wikimedia Commons. If you look at the top left, that is one of the images of Josephine Baker that is really getting lots of views and hits on French-speaking Wikipedia. This is one of the images from the first batch of images we uploaded from the Votes for Women campaign exhibit, at NPG. If you look at the image of Sojourner Truth on the left, that was the lead image on her Wikipedia article in several languages for many, many years. The image on the right is the one from the National Portrait Gallery that we added to Wikimedia Commons, and we replaced the image on the left with the beautiful high-res image on the right. And so now if you go to Sojourner Truth's Wikipedia page, this is how it appears. It looks really great in that info box. And also when you Google Sojourner Truth, now this is the first image that Google Images populates. If you ask Siri a question, as Andrew mentioned earlier, this image pops up and we are getting those clicks to our content through the Wikiverse, which is amazing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our partnership with the Smithsonian affiliates. We know that it's 200 museums across the country. We are providing, or we did provide, Wikipedia training to Wiki affiliate staff through the Wiki education course. So it's a module of 6 weeks where they learn how to edit Wikipedia and they create new articles and also are encouraged to add some of their assets to Wikimedia Commons. And so 80 affiliate staff participated. They added over 70,000 words about women from their collections to Wikipedia, almost 1,000 references, and they tested adding some of their images from their collections to Commons. We also had them do a list building component at the end of the course where they gave us 10 or so names with metadata, links, any information they could to get those women onto Wikipedia or Wikidata. So we have a list building kind of crowdsourcing component of American women who don't have representation on Wiki that we can then use at our editathons and add those women to our editing work lists. And then we have our internship program, which is again 6 weeks. Last year, we had 2 Wiki interns, one who focused on images and the legality around open access. She was a law student, and another intern who was going into grad school to focus on women's and gender studies. We also provided Wikimedia training for all of the Because of Horror Story interns and gave them a little bit more of a deep dive into this gender gap on Wikipedia, which was really great, and we'll be doing again with the cohort this summer. You can see some of the stats here. The top dashboard that you see with stats was from the images that she uploaded. And then the bottom is the intern who focused more on creating and adding words to Wikipedia. In her summer internship, she added over 35,000 words to Wikipedia. We invited that intern back for the fall. And these are both of her dashboards for fall and summer. And she added over 200,000 words to Wikipedia, which for a new editor who's also in grad school, this is an outstanding amount of work, and it really shows the power not only of our internships programs at the Smithsonian, but how excited interns coming in are to do digital and Wikipedia work. And she is saying now that she wants to do Wiki as a career, which is an amazing outcome. So the future of this work, continuing to think about how we can work with youth organizations to edit Wikipedia or just learn information literacy skills about how to interpret and read Wikipedia and move away from Wikipedia to do additional research, doing more work with our affiliates. They're especially interested in how they can host their own public programming around Wikipedia, specifically about women are things in their unique collections. Doing more of that training with our internal interns. We have another intern coming back or starting this summer. I'm sharing an intern with APAC, and we'll be adding AAPI women from our collections to Wikipedia, which is a very needed area on Wiki. And working on new models of engagement like micro crowdsourcing and staff editing, and see how Andrew and I together can build that up. Another thing that I wanted to touch on before I hand it back to Andrew is the Wiki Funk list that is being worked on at SLA, Liz Liz Harmon and Mariah Wall, who's a data scientist with the AWHI, are working on adding women in science, past and present, at the Smithsonian to this list that Andrew will then batch upload into Wikidata so we can create Wikidata properties about all of these women. It really is a huge undertaking. There are over 300 names on this list with tons of metadata about where they were educated, their research, links about them, so that not only we can get them onto Wikidata, so when you search them, you can see all this great information about them, but then on our side, we can do public programming to crowdsource getting those Wikipedia articles created. Andrew, do you want to talk more about the technical component of that batch upload?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think it's interesting to note that while most people recognize the Wikipedia part of the Wikimedia movement, this part where we're talking about data science and creating what we call Wikidata entries for each of these women with their ORCID IDs and unique identifiers to them, is really the important big first step to making sure that we can get more biographies into Wikipedia. And this is crucial data work that Liz Harmon is doing. And Dr. Harmon is doing, amazing stuff here to try to make sure we have all the data lined up before we contribute it to Wikimedia Commons and Wikidata. So I thought we just kind of wrap up the talk with just a really powerful exploration and demo of how all this ties together. So if you are an iPhone user, this is probably the easiest thing for you to do is to use your camera app. If you're an Android user, you can go to, I think, the Google app allows you to scan QR codes, or any app that you have that can scan QR codes. I have a QR code here that will show you what we call a Wikidata knowledge graph that shows you relationships of things that we have in Wikidata. And this illustrates the types of things that we've enhanced in Wikidata using Smithsonian assets, so that we've actually uploaded images and metadata of artifacts from American history, from Namak and other places. And this will show you all those things in real time. So if you scan that QR code, and I'm going to do it with you folks here with my phone. If you scan the QR code, you should see that it wants to open a link with w.wiki. So go ahead and open that up. And what you probably will see, and I hope you'll see, is a dancing interactive graph on screen. You can see that moving on the screen right there, similar to what you see there. And what's really cool about this actually shows you, if you look at the middle of it, Elizabeth Keckley, who was a dressmaker to Mary Todd Lincoln, you will see her connections using what we have in Wikidata. Who was her employer? Mary Todd Lincoln. What was something that she designed? Mary Lincoln's dress. And you can see that there's all kinds of interesting connections here that go beyond just one museum, right? You can see that actually the shoes that are attributed to Elizabeth Keckley are actually held by Namak. You can see that in the graph. By the way, she actually had a prolific career after being the dressmaker. She wrote a pretty scandalous tell-all book of what happened in the White House as she experienced it, with a book called Behind the Scenes. And in fact, she became so notable that she was a character in an opera that Philip Glass wrote. And it's really fascinating to see all these things in this knowledge graph. You can actually browse, all these connections. And this is kind of the dream of digital humanities, right? To see all these connections, and that we're not just limited to a arts database or a literature database or one museum database. We actually see all these connections. And this is the promise of linked open data, where we can explore these things. So it's important to make sure that you know that this is not a canned demo. This is actually a live query on Wikidata. So if we changed any of these properties and you reload the page, you'd immediately see those in a second. And that's really just amazing. Like, we've done this for years now, but the public hasn't seen too much of what's going on here. But this is really amazing to see this live and in real time. So I encourage you to try this out more, and you can actually go and explore more of these types of knowledge graphs that we have with Smithsonian assets. So some of the future plans that we have, there are still millions of objects that the Smithsonian has in its API that we have not yet ingested into the Wikimedia sphere. So we are going to keep doing that. Smithsonian's working on its own Wikidata-like database using a piece of software called Wikibase. And this is being led by Jackie Shea from SLA, using what they call the LD4 Program for Collaborative Cataloging, also called the PCC effort that's being done, not just at Smithsonian, but across a lot of different libraries and archives around the US. There's a lot of interest now in doing these types of things after seeing that knowledge graph and seeing how much it can bring to the table in terms of visualizing collections and understanding them. There's a lot more folks interested in this Wikidata approach. And what does it like to work with Wiki? Well, we have high resolution images that we're uploading. We have 3D images that we're uploading as well. And we're getting ready for an event that's coming up, right, Kelly?
Yep, on the 31st at 1 p.m., if you scan that QR code, there's a link to more information and how to register. It is in collaboration with NMNH and the If Then exhibit, the orange sculptures that you see around the mall, adding those women in STEM to Wikipedia. And then it sounds like we have some questions, so we can start to answer those. One of the questions is how you can get involved to get training and edit Wikipedia. Definitely coming to one of our events. I'll put a link in the chat about all of our editathons. We welcome your attendance to learn how to edit Wikipedia, but also if your unit wants to host an editathon, whether it be about a collection or a new exhibit. How do we broadcast the editathons? We go through Eventbrite for registration and we host them on Zoom. Andrew and I collaboratively host with the unit. We do a brief slideshow about the basics of Wikipedia, and we do a lot of live demoing and screen sharing and answering questions about maybe a stumbling block that an attendee is having live, and we walk them through that on the screen share. Andrew, do you want to answer this question about the Vera Simons example?
Yeah, can you tell me what the question is on Vera Simons?
Oh, sorry, I thought you could see it. It says, with the Vera Simons example, did you create the Wikidata entry or was it automatically generated from the Wikipedia content?
Oh, that's a good question. So the article is written by hand in that case. But there are multiple ways to do those things, right? If the basic data about the person is in Wikidata already, and Wikidata holds almost just like, like an index card worth of stuff, right? It's like, what's her first name, last name, date of birth, these types of things as statements. You can generate an article like skeleton based off Wikidata, or you can write it from scratch. I remember from that event, we wrote it from scratch, but we created a Wikidata item for her as well, which had the information redundant. And we actually have been in touch, we being the Wikimedia community has been in touch with Google, Apple, Amazon, Twitter, Facebook. They all are sucking the information in a good way from Wikipedia to use for their knowledge bases. So we know that they are actively on a second by second basis ingesting this. So it's pretty interesting to see how fast they do that.
And so we have another question about what it means when we say that open access assets are in Wikimedia. And what that means is that we take an image, whether it be from the open access portal or a unit gives us a batch of images. We first add all of those to Wikimedia Commons, which is the image repository happening behind Wikipedia. And then we add each one in by hand into the Wikipedia article. Let's see.
Yeah, or in general, the license that we use, that the Smithsonian uses CC0 for the open access policy. So that means that it can be used in any way, anywhere, and that's what we use.
Good point, Andrew. And then we had a question about, do we work with Smithsonian affiliates as well? We definitely do. And we are actively exploring, based on what I touched on in our presentation, how we can work together with Smithsonian affiliates to do more public programming around Wikipedia, like empowering them to host editathons and creating some toolkit trainings, working with them if they need assistance or want to learn more about batch uploading images from their collections. And then we also have a little bit of funding from a grant to travel to 2 affiliates to host editathons. One of those were in the early stages of planning for September of 2022 at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. So I would be traveling down to Jackson, Mississippi to help them host an editathon, do some wiki training for their staff about things like batch uploading. And I believe the topic of the editathon will be about women in the history of the civil rights movement based on what they have in their archival collections. And I think that was all the questions that we had. If you have others, please feel free to email Andrew and I at any point. If you have batch images or data that you want to add, we can assist you with that. Or if you're interested in hosting an edit-a-thon and collaborating with us that way, we would be happy to chat more about that. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.